You collect useful information, but even more importantly, you do something useful with it. A lot of people collect useful information, but then it just sits. It's never actually analysed. Now, I know that's a time pressure sometimes for people, but don't collect, get that in balance. Collect the information that you think you can do usefully. And finally, remember, it is a tool, not a weapon. It's not there to use. Because you find some interesting or sometimes you can find something you think, well, that's a very interesting statistic or it's a very interesting thing, and I'll just go and confront somebody with that. The problem is, in confronting them with that, you may find that there's something inside that collection that you haven't. So use it as a tool. Use it as not as something that is used and is used to make judgments. It's really the start of those things. The judgment comes later down the track. One of the things we've been working quite strongly on, obviously in social inclusion, are action plans that have certain projects in them. I came to the unit first to talk, we're looking at some evaluation work, A, around the drug summit, and B, around the homelessness project plan. And what we were looking at was a whole range of programs that were designed to have particular sorts of outcomes. One of the things I always look at when I'm looking at projects or programs is what I call the inherent logic. There needs to be inherent logic. And this is just how will these outputs achieve the outcomes? Does the proposal or project look like we'll have the desired effect? Does what we're doing is heading in the right direction? And if not, how do we fix it? Or why are we doing it? This is probably the single most systematic failure across government in program design today, I think, in terms of just the lack of inherent logic at the front end, that very policy development end, where people don't use the self-evident skills that we all have to say, this can never work. I know this can never work because it doesn't add up, it isn't logical. And I think that's not happening. What's happening is something like this. We look at it like this. We use these terms as input. We try to call outputs effort, because an outcome impact sometimes too, because I think it's a bit better. Outputs, I think, is one of those things. It's got that sort of treasury built in all of it. But essentially what you're looking for is this. Essentially, you're looking for something that links your inputs to your effort to your outcome. And what you're looking for is really strong logic lines. Now, and a well-designed one may have that. For lots of reasons, it may not be possible to have that. So what you end up with is something that looks more like this, in that you might be quite confident about your inputs to your outputs, but you may be a little less confident about the impact that you're going to have. And so in some ways, it's a bit of a long bow. But you think the logic's there enough to give it a go. But what happens sometimes too is it's like this. It's really a wish and a prayer job. There is absolutely no connection when you look at it between what the effort is and what the impact's going to be. You only have to look at it for a few minutes, you can realise that in fact this, and it's not to say this output isn't well designed or whatever, but it isn't got the relationship that is there. It isn't got. We work really strongly at this input-output level. The mechanism, and I should say to Anubi, and the reasons that this may happen is because there may be multiple influences here. Things aren't linear. Programs have impacts all over the place, and other things impact on programs. And so there may be multiple influences. The evidence may just not be there. You just may not be able to collect the level of evidence you need. The timescales can defeat you sometimes too. You may be getting them, but they may be out there somewhere, but you're going to get them. And you can't, in the timescale that you need, be predicting that. And there may be indirect impacts that are coming into play too. So it isn't to say we don't necessarily do some of these things where the logic is weak, but there does have to be some crucial inherent logic about where you're trying to go. We've developed this technique for social inclusion that very much focuses on intermediate or immediate outcomes. And this is what we call the walk alongside, which means we start from the very beginning and look at what's happening at the input level, looking for the logic. Now, a lot of programs get defeated at the input level, as you probably, and 9 times out of 10 people will say to you, we didn't get enough funding. But 9 times out of 10 I've found that there's more than one dynamic happening, and often it's these other things that defeat the input. Other inputs are leadership. If the leadership isn't there, if the knowledge isn't there, if the governance isn't right, if you don't have the workforce and the skills, and you don't have the resources other than funding. And yet 9 times out of 10 people will say we only failed because we didn't have enough funding, or we didn't have, or we didn't have sufficient sort of resources. So there is that sense of looking at the input end, and we look quite strongly at the input end to make sure that those dynamics are in place. Because at the input end, you can fix it. You know, if the leadership isn't right, well, you can fix the leadership, and you can fix some of those sorts of things. If the knowledge base isn't right, well, you can fast track some knowledge into the program. But you've got to recognise that it's a problem. The next stage we'll look at obviously the output and effort, and again, you've got to look at all these things. It's not just the doing thing, I mean, what you're going to do. It's really the concept and theory behind it. How you've designed it, how's it going to be specified, what's the evidence for it, how are you going to time it, what does it align with. There are a whole range of issues that are really important to look at in outputs. But so many people talk about their output just in terms of the program. And I always look for the doing thing in the output. But what are you actually going to be doing? And people give definitions, but they're not active. They don't talk about the doing thing. Output is about what you're doing. And then, of course, you've got the impact. And what we've put in the middle of our programs is to look at what we call immediate or intermediate outcomes, which means we pick times, and Street to Home is a good example of a program that after it had been operational for 3 months, we went in and had a look and see how it was operating. And we found at that time there were some problems in terms of where it was situated. There were some cultural problems for staff shifting from the old model to the new model. There were some contextual problems in other agencies, feeling disconnected and a bit threatened by the agency. Some misunderstandings that had managed to get themselves wound around. And so we did some immediate work. We fed that work back in a respectful but clear way to the agency, because some of it was their responsibility for what they were doing. And then they were able to review and do what they were doing, and so we were able to get a sort of cycle moving that actually impacted on the outputs. And so before it got to a point where it had defeated itself, we were able to do that. And we think there's been a significant shift.